where did we come from? I mean, how did we actually become who we are today? And maybe the biggest question, really, where are we headed as a species? These are ancient questions, right? Humanity's been pondering them forever. And today we're doing a deep dive into some really incredible sources that honestly offer a unique shortcut to getting properly informed on this huge journey of Homo sapiens. Yeah, our mission here is to take some groundbreaking historical research, pull out the most important bits of knowledge, the real nuggets, and shed light on some surprising parts of our story. So by the end of this, you'll have a pretty solid, concise grasp of the major turning points that shaped us. From our biology, right up to the revolutions defining our world, and even our potential future, which is kind of mind-blowing. Okay, let's start with something tricky right off the bat, a paradox. We Homo sapiens, we love our intelligence, don't we? We tend to assume, well, more brain power is always better. But hang on, if sheer brain power was the only thing that mattered, wouldn't evolution look totally different? Like, why aren't cats doing calculus? Turns out this big brain of ours, it costs a lot.
Oh, absolutely. It's a huge cost. A jumbo brain is, well, it's a jumbo drain on the body's resources. Think about it, it's only about 2 to 3% of our body weight, but it burns through a massive 25% of the body's energy when we're just sitting around resting.
25%, wow.
Yeah. Compare that to other apes, their brains only need about 8%. So, archaic humans paid for this big brain in a couple of key ways. One, they had to spend way more time looking for food. And two, interestingly, their muscles actually atrophied. It's like energy got diverted from biceps to neurons.
Huh. So we literally traded muscle for mind. Explains why I wouldn't win an arm wrestle with the chimp, I guess. But we can build rockets. It's amazing how that biological trade-off connects to our expansion, too. Around 70,000 years ago, sapiens start spreading out from East Africa into Eurasia, which already had other kinds of humans living there. So what happened when they met? This is where it gets really interesting.
Right. It's one of the hottest debates, really. There are two main conflicting ideas. The first is the interbreeding theory. This theory paints a picture of, well, mingling. Sapiens spread out, met local populations like Neanderthals in Europe and the Middle East, or maybe Homo erectus further east, and they interbred. And we now know Neanderthals weren't the sort of brutish cavemen we used to imagine. They were muscular, actually had larger brains than sapiens, used tools, fire, cared for their sick.
So this theory suggests many of us today, like Eurasians or people from China and Korea, are actually a mix, part sapiens, part Neanderthal or erectus.
Exactly. We might carry echoes of these other humans within our DNA. That's the interbreeding idea. But then there's the complete opposite view, the replacement theory. This one tells a story of incompatibility, maybe even conflict, leading to the extinction of the other human species. It argues sapiens and these other humans just weren't interested in each other. Maybe they looked too different, smelled different, or even if they were, the genetic gap was just too big. They couldn't produce fertile kids. So in this view, sapiens basically replaced everyone else without mixing. We just outcompeted them, maybe drove them to extinction. If this is true, then all humans today are pure sapiens, tracing our lineage exclusively back to that East African group around 70,000 years ago.
Wow, those are two very different stories about who we are.
Yeah.
What does it mean for us today, depending on which theory is closer to the truth? How does it change how we see ourselves?
It's fundamental, really. If interbreeding is right, our human family tree is this complex, tangled bush with roots reaching into different ancient human types. We're a mosaic. But if replacement is right, then humanity shares this single, relatively recent origin point in Africa. It shapes debates about everything, from human unity and diversity to concepts of race. It cuts right to the core. Okay, so moving on from our biology. There's this huge shift, the cognitive revolution, maybe around 70,000 years ago. The source calls this the moment history declared its independence from biology.
Independence from biology, what does that mean exactly?
It means that from that point on, our development isn't just driven by our genes and hormones anymore. It starts being driven mainly by the interaction of ideas, images, shared stories, fantasies. Culture takes the steering wheel, not just DNA.
That's a really powerful way to put it. But, okay, if culture became the main driver, how come we're still, as the source says, embarrassingly similar to chimpanzees on an individual level.
Hmm.
What's the real difference that let us build, cities in the internet?
Yeah, good question. It's not about individual smarts, not really, or even just making tools. The absolute key difference is our unique ability for cooperation between very large numbers of strangers. Think
Cooperation.
about it. You could never get thousands of chimps together in, say, Times Square without total mayhem, but humans, we do it all the time. We form trade networks, huge political systems, mass movements, things that require millions of strangers working together in orderly
Which
ways.
allows that.
It's what the source calls the mythical glue. Shared beliefs in things that aren't, well, physically real. Shared imagined orders, fictions, stories, like gods, nations, money, human rights. These shared myths allow huge numbers of strangers to trust each other and cooperate towards common goals.
So it's our imagination, our ability to believe in shared stories that binds us together.
Precisely. That's what made us masters of creation. Consider tools again. A flint spearhead. One person, maybe a few minutes' work. A modern nuclear warhead. That needs millions of strangers cooperating across the globe. Miners, physicists, engineers, politicians, all believing in the project, the nation, the money funding it.
That collective power built on shared fiction, that really sets the stage for the next big one, doesn't it? The agricultural revolution. We usually see farming as this obvious huge step forward, but was it really all positive, especially for the average person back then?
Well, that's the common view, but the source throws some cold water on it. It argues the agricultural revolution was actually a trap for the
A
individual.
trap? How so?
For starters, the diet often got worse. Relying heavily on cereals like wheat meant less variety, fewer minerals and vitamins. It was harder to digest, terrible for teeth and gums,
Okay, I didn't know that.
and dependence on just one or two crops. If they failed drought, disease, it meant mass starvation. Plus, surprisingly, violence seems to have increased dramatically in early farming societies. Some studies suggest maybe 15%, even up to 50% in some places, of deaths were due to human violence.
50%. That's staggering.
It is. We look back now from our position of relative comfort and security and we project that backwards. But imagine being, say, a 3-year-old girl dying of malnutrition in first century China because the harvest failed. She's not thinking, oh, but this is great for the species long term.
Right. Not much consolation.
Exactly. So, what agriculture did achieve wasn't necessarily a better life for the individual. It achieved massive population growth for the species. Look at Jericho. Before farming, maybe 100 relatively healthy foragers lived there. After, a village of 1,000 farmers, often cramped, disease-ridden, malnourished.
So, from evolution's perspective, more DNA copies getting passed on, it was a huge success.
A massive success by that metric. It allowed us to keep more people alive under worse conditions, as the source puts it. So an evolutionary triumph, yes, but for the average farmer, maybe not such a great deal, hence the trap. And there's even a fascinating theory linked to Göbekli Tepe, those incredible ancient structures in Turkey.
Oh, yeah, the huge stone pillars.
Right, built by foragers before widespread agriculture. The theory suggests that maybe, just maybe, the need to feed the workers building and maintaining a massive temple complex like that spurred the switch to intensive wheat cultivation, not the other way around.
So the temple came first, and the village grew to support it. That flips the usual story on its head.
It does. It suggests shared belief, shared projects might have driven the agricultural shift, not just the search for more food.
Okay, so agriculture allows bigger populations, but then you have the problem of managing all these people. How did society scale up cooperation even further? You mentioned shared myths, but what else was needed? Especially for managing, information.
Right. You need more than just food and myths. You need systems. Complex societies leaned even more heavily on these imagined constructs or fictions. They essentially create artificial instincts guiding how millions of strangers should interact. Let's contrast two really powerful imagined orders. Take Hammurabi's code from ancient Babylon around 1776 BC. It laid out a strict hierarchy. If a high-status man killed the daughter of another high-status man, the punishment wasn't on the killer himself, but his own innocent daughter would be executed.
Wow, That sounds incredibly unjust to us.
To us, yes.
Yep.
But to Babylonians, that was justice, based on their imagined hierarchical order. Now, fast forward 3,500 years to the American Declaration of Independence. It proclaims the opposite: universal equality. All men are created equal, endowed with rights like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Two completely different systems of justice.
Exactly. And the source makes the provocative point that, from a purely objective biological standpoint, both are wrong. Why? Because principles like equality, rights, liberty, even the creator or Hammurabi's hierarchy, these things don't exist out there in nature, like trees or rivers. They exist only in our shared imagination. They're cultural inventions.
That's a challenging idea.
Get that?
That these bedrock principles are fictions we agree to live by. How do societies keep these fictions going generation after generation if they aren't real in a biological sense?
Rule number one is you never admit they're imagined. You insist they're objective reality, ordained by gods or by nature itself. Rule number two, you educate relentlessly. These ideas are woven into everything: laws, myths, fairy tales, art, architecture, even fashion.
Fashion. How does fashion maintain an imagined order?
Think about it. Today, a billionaire might wear jeans, originally working-class clothing, but a medieval nobleman would never have been caught dead wearing peasant clothes. Clothing instantly signaled your place in the imagined hierarchy. It constantly reinforces the rules. Now, to manage these huge societies with millions of people, complex laws, taxes, property, you hit a bottleneck. The human brain just can't store all that data reliably.
Right. You need a way to record things.
Exactly. And that's where writing comes in. But it didn't emerge for poetry or philosophy. Nope. It started with accounting, mundane record keeping.
Accounting.
Seriously. The very first name recorded in history isn't a king or a prophet. It's an accountant named Kushim. One of the earliest written messages we have from Sumer about 5,000 years ago basically says 29,086 measures barley, 37 months, Kushim.
Huh. So history's first autograph was basically signing off on a grain receipt.
Pretty much. Sign Kushim. It shows writing was initially about managing economic information.
Okay, so cuneiform script for accounting. But what about managing empires with millions of people, like the Incas? They didn't have a full script like that, did they?
No, they didn't, but they had something remarkable. Cuipus. These were systems of colorful knotted cords. They couldn't record prose, but they could store huge amounts of mathematical data, tax records, census data, property ownership, essential for running an empire stretching across the Andes with 10 to 12 million people. It was a different kind of information storage.
Knotted cords holding an empire together. Amazing.
But just inventing writing or Cuipus wasn't enough. The real breakthrough came with developing systems for using that information. Efficient ways to archive, catalog, retrieve data, and training specialists, scribes, clerks, accountants who knew how to manage it all. It's about the whole data processing system.
Okay, so we've gone from small bands to complex societies with writing and data management. Let's zoom out again. How did we get from all these separate, diverse cultures scattered around the globe to the single, interconnected global society we basically have today?
Right. Well, the key thing is that human cultures are never static. They're always changing, always in constant flux, often because they contain internal contradictions.
Contradictions, like what?
Like, think of medieval European knights. They believed in Christian teachings of meekness and turning the other cheek, and they believed in a chivalric code of honor, defending your reputation with violence if necessary. These tensions drive change.
Okay. That makes sense.
So this constant change, combined with increasing interaction between cultures, led to this slow, kind of irreversible process towards unification. Today, pretty much everyone operates within the same global systems, politically, economically, legally, scientifically.
What were the biggest forces pushing that unification forward?
The source highlights three huge ones. First, money. It acts as a universal medium of exchange. It lets strangers cooperate easily because everyone trusts its value, even if they don't trust each other personally. You can convert almost anything into almost anything else.
Like what?
Like a A soldier finishing his service can convert his brawn or fighting skill, paid as wages, into brain by paying for college. Or historically, people even tried to convert, say, sex work into religious salvation by buying church indulgences. Money bridges these gaps.
And it's easy to carry around, unlike bartering goods.
Exactly. Much easier to store and transport wealth as cowrie shells or silver coins than as tons of barley. But remember, the value of something like a silver shekel isn't inherent in the silver itself, it's purely cultural. We agree it has value.
So money builds this universal trust, helps cooperation. Sounds great. Is there a dark side?
Oh, definitely. The source argues that while money builds trust between strangers, it also corrodes local traditions, intimate relations, and human values. It tends to replace community bonds and traditions with the cold laws of supply and demand. It constantly tries to break down barriers around things societies consider priceless honor, loyalty, love, family. It leads to situations where people might sell their children into debt bondage, or soldiers might sell their allegiance to the highest bidder. The risk is turning the whole world into one big and rather heartless marketplace.
Though maybe society is pushed back against that.
Yes, they do. People constantly try to build new dams to protect certain things from being purely market driven, but the pressure for money is always there. Okay, the second major unifying force, religion.
Right. Obvious one.
Defined here as a system of norms and values based on belief in a superhuman order. Now, lots of ancient religions were local, but the really impactful ones, emerging especially in the first millennium BC, were universal and missionary. They aimed to convert everyone.
Like Buddhism, Christianity, Islam.
Exactly. Think about the shift from polytheism, many gods, often local, towards monotheism. You had early attempts like Pharaoh Akhenaten in Egypt or the local monotheism of ancient Judaism. But the big breakthrough for global monotheism really came with Christianity, especially after Paul of Tarsus decided it should be spread to everyone, not just Jews. It eventually took over the Roman Empire.
And then Islam followed relatively quickly.
Yes, spreading incredibly fast out of Arabia. Through missionary work, trade, sometimes conquest, these universal missionary religions laid the foundations for much of the world we see today, which is largely built on monotheistic assumptions, even in secular societies.
It's interesting, though, how even within monotheism, people seem comfortable with contradictions, like believing in one all-powerful God, but also believing in the devil as an independent force.
Right. It's a classic philosophical puzzle. Monotheism struggles to explain evil if God is all good and all powerful. Dualism, with a good God and an evil God, explains evil easily but struggles to explain order. Yet, millions of devout Christians, Muslims, Jews somehow manage to believe in both an omnipotent God and an independent devil. Even though that idea isn't strictly in the Old Testament theology, we're good at holding contradictory ideas.
We certainly seem to be. Okay, so we have money and religion reshaping the world. But there's another force, maybe more recent, that fundamentally changed our relationship with knowledge itself and our power over nature.
Absolutely. That's the scientific revolution. Before about 1500, most cultures look backwards. They believed the golden age was in the past. Knowledge was about understanding the existing wisdom, the ancient texts, God's plan, trying to overcome fundamental problems like famine, disease, or poverty through human ingenuity. That was seen as hubris, arrogance.
Thinking you could know better than the ancients or God.
Precisely. Then, around 1620, Francis Bacon puts forward this radical idea: knowledge is power. The real test of knowledge isn't whether it's true in some absolute sense or aligns with scripture. The test is utility. Does it empower us? Can we do things with it? That shifted everything. But here's a common misconception: the tight link between science and technology. That's actually very recent. It really only solidified in the 19th century.
Really? I always assumed science drove technology for much longer.
Yep. Before 1500, science and tech were largely separate worlds. Rulers might fund astronomers or philosophers, but they rarely thought, let's fund research to invent better weapons or tools. Improvements came from craftspeople, carpenters, blacksmiths, tinkering, not university professors.
So a better cart design came from the workshop, not the library.
Exactly. Compare that to today's military industrial scientific complex. Modern wars are scientific productions. Governments pour billions into research, hoping for the next breakthrough weapon or surveillance tech. It's a completely different mindset.
That's a really important distinction.
Yeah.
Okay, so if the science tech link is recent, why did the scientific and industrial revolutions explode in Europe specifically, not in, say, China or India, which were hugely sophisticated civilizations? Was it just that Europe suddenly got way better technology?
Actually, before about 1850, the technological gap wasn't that big. China, for instance, was arguably ahead in many areas for centuries. Think about Admiral Zheng. He's treasure fleets in the early 1400s.
Right, those enormous ships that sailed all over the Indian Ocean.
Huge fleets. They dwarfed Columbus's little ships 90 years later. But Zheng, he didn't conquer or colonize. His mission wasn't driven by a desire for domination. And then the Chinese emperors just stopped the expedition.
Right.
Internal politics, changing priorities. The crucial difference, the source argues, wasn't technology per se, it was Europe's unique mindset, this unparalleled and insatiable ambition to explore and conquer, combined with developing values and legal systems that supported this.
Like what?
Like the rise of joint stock companies. Think the Dutch VOC or the British East India Company. These weren't state expeditions, they were private companies funded by thousands of investors who trusted the legal system to protect their investments. European empires were often built by capitalists, not just kings. Monarchies like Spain and France, which were less trustworthy with investors' money, actually fell behind.
So ambition combined with a system that could fund it reliably.
Exactly. And underpinning that system was the rise of capitalism, not just as an economic system, but almost as a creed, a belief system, its core tenet. Economic growth is the supreme good. Everything should serve the goal of increasing production and profits.
But isn't endless growth kind of unrealistic?
Yeah.
The source mentions an analogy like wolves can't expect the number of sheep to grow forever. Resources are finite.
Right. It seems to fly in the face of almost everything we know about the universe. But capitalism has survived and thrived based on one crucial thing: faith in the future, specifically. Faith that science and technology will keep producing new discoveries, new energy sources, new materials, entire new industries.
To justify the continued growth and back up all the credit and investment.
Precisely. To back up the make-believe money, as the source calls, the vast amounts of credit created by banks and governments, especially since the 2008 financial crisis. It's a system built on trust in future progress, powered by science.
Okay, we've charted this incredible path of expansion, unification, technological power, but it hasn't all been smooth sailing. While we've gained so much knowledge and material wealth, what's been the impact on, our daily lives, our happiness, our communities?
Yeah, this is where we hit some really interesting modern paradoxes. First off, despite constant news about war and conflict, the period after World War II has actually been, statistically, the most peaceful era in human history.
Really? That feels counterintuitive sometimes.
Oh, it does, but the numbers are striking. For example, in the year 2002, globally, far more people died from suicide than were killed in all wars and violent crimes combined.
Wow. Why the decline in violence?
A huge factor is the rise of the state. Over centuries, powerful states gradually disarmed their populations and took a monopoly on violence, suppressing local feuds and banditry. Life in medieval Europe was far, far more violent on a daily basis than in modern Europe. Murder rates were maybe 20 to 40 times higher back then.
So the state, despite its own issues, made daily life safer.
Generally, yes. Plus, war itself has become less profitable and vastly more expensive. Wealth today is mostly knowledge, technical skill, complex organizations, human capital. You can't easily loot that like you could loot gold or farmland.
And the cost.
The cost of major war has skyrocketed, especially with nuclear weapons. For superpowers, all-out war is no longer a viable policy, it's collective suicide. This has fostered a more peaceful, if tense, international order, at least between the major powers. But this era of peace and progress came with huge social upheaval, especially from the Industrial Revolution onwards. Think about the social engineering involved. Natural rhythms of agriculture were replaced by the uniform and precise schedules of the factory, the office, the school timetable, the hospital routine.
Our whole lives became regimented by the clock.
Exactly. And perhaps the biggest change was the collapse of the family and the community as the primary support structures.
Mhm.
For most of history, your family and your local village, your neighborhood provided almost everything: healthcare, education, welfare, job opportunities, elderly care.
They were your safety net.
Totally. But over the last 2 centuries, the state and the market have increasingly taken over those roles. They provide schools, hospitals, pensions, police, supermarkets. They've become, in a way, the mother and father of the individual.
Which sounds like it could be freeing in a way. You're not totally dependent on your family or village anymore.
It absolutely brought liberation, especially for individuals previously constrained by traditional roles. Think women gaining economic independence or young people being able to leave their village. The liberation of the individual is real.
But there's a but, isn't there?
There is. The flip side is often alienation, loneliness. Communities weakened. Family ties became more voluntary and therefore more fragile. We live in an increasingly lonely world of unraveling communities and families. We have more freedom to choose our connections, but also more freedom to be left alone.
A trade-off then. Liberation for potentially less belonging? What about happiness itself? Has all this progress actually made us happier?
Ah, the million-dollar question. The research, interestingly, suggests that happiness does not really depend on objective conditions like wealth, health, or community nearly as much as we think.
So more money doesn't automatically mean more happiness.
Not necessarily beyond a certain basic level. What matters much more is the correlation between objective conditions and subjective expectations.
Okay, unpack that. What does it mean?
It means our happiness depends on whether reality matches our expectations. If you expect little and get a bit, you might be happy. If you expect a lot and get a lot, you might still be dissatisfied because you expected even more.
Like the lottery winner who ends up miserable or the person who adapts surprisingly well after a terrible accident.
Exactly those kinds of scenarios. When things improve, our expectations tend to inflate just as quickly, sometimes even faster, leaving us no happier than before, or even less happy. It's the hedonic treadmill.
So all our modern advances haven't necessarily bought us more contentment.
It seems not, on average. The ancient wisdom found in Buddhism, Stoicism, and other philosophies had it right thousands of years ago. Being satisfied with what you already have is far more important than getting more of what you want. Modern psychology, with all its data, is basically confirming this ancient insight.
That's humbling, actually. Okay, so looking forward then, given all this history, where might we be going? The source talks about us moving beyond natural selection into something else.
Yes. This is maybe the most radical idea. We, Homo sapiens, are potentially beginning to transcend the limits imposed by millions of years of evolution. We're starting to break the laws of natural selection and replace them, consciously or unconsciously, with the laws of intelligent design.
Intelligent design, not in the religious sense, I assume.
No, in the literal sense.
Yeah.
Designed by human intelligence. We're starting to engineer life itself. Think about Alba, the fluorescent green rabbit created in 2000.
The glow-in-the-dark bunny.
Right. An artist commissioned scientists to insert a gene from a fluorescent jellyfish into a rabbit embryo. Alba glowed green under blue light. She wasn't a product of random mutation and natural selection. She was deliberately designed. The source calls her a harbinger of things to come.
So how might this intelligent design replace natural selection? What forms could it take?
The source outlines 3 main paths. First, biological engineering. This is direct intervention at the biological level. It's been going on for ages. Really think castration of bulls thousands of years ago. But now, we're talking about genetic engineering, creating artificial organs, maybe even de-extinction projects.
Like bringing back mammoths? Or even Neanderthals?
Potentially. There are projects trying to reconstruct mammoth DNA to implant into elephant eggs. Engineering a Neanderthal from ancient DNA is far more complex and ethically fraught, but the idea is being discussed. That's direct biological redesign. Second path, cyborg engineering, merging organic and non-organic parts. We already have bionic limbs controlled by thought, cochlear implants, maybe soon artificial retinas connected to the brain. Think rats with electrodes implanted allowing remote control, or humans directly interfacing with computers,
Becoming part machine.
essentially. And the third path, perhaps the most profound, engineering inorganic life.
Inorganic life, like AI robots.
Yes, but potentially much more fundamental. Think about computer viruses or algorithms that can evolve independently, creating new versions humans never designed. Or the massive projects like the EU's Human Brain Project, trying to simulate or even recreate a human brain digitally.
Creating a digital mind.
That's the ultimate ambition for some. If achieved, it could mean life itself could break out into the vastness of the inorganic realm. Consciousness, intelligence, evolution happening entirely outside the bounds of organic chemistry.
This is mind-bending stuff.
Yeah.
It sounds like it could change everything about what it means to be human. What are the potential consequences?
Huge and potentially terrifying. For one, it could lead to the most unequal of all societies. Imagine a future where the wealthy can afford biological or cybernetic enhancements that make them genuinely smarter, stronger, healthier, longer lived than the unenhanced masses. The old pretensions of the upper classes could become biological reality.
A biological caste system.
A real risk. But the deeper potential is changing Homo sapiens itself. Not just our bodies, but our minds, our emotions, our desires. What if we could engineer away sadness or aggression? Or engineer new forms of pleasure or consciousness?
Could we even remain human in any recognizable sense?
That's the question. We might create inheritors, maybe post-humans or something else entirely, who are more different from us than we are from Neanderthals. Beings whose inner lives, whose goals, whose very concepts of me, you, men, women, love, and hate might be utterly alien and irrelevant to us. This points towards a potential new singularity, a future so different that our current models of the world, our values, simply cease to apply.
Wow. What an incredible and slightly terrifying arc.
Mhm.
We've gone from these early humans struggling with the energy cost of a big brain, figuring out cooperation through shared stories, navigating the agricultural trap, building empires on imagined orders and data, unifying the globe through money, religion, and science, grappling with the paradoxes of peace and happiness in modernity, and now standing on the verge of perhaps redesigning ourselves out of existence as we know it. The power of cooperation, the grip of imagined orders, the relentless pace of change, these themes really stand out.
They do. And it's crucial to remember history isn't a straight line upwards. Its choices, the paths taken, weren't necessarily made for the benefit of individual humans. There was no grand plan. The future isn't set in stone either. As the source says, we stand on the threshold of both heaven and hell, and seemingly small things, a string of coincidences, could still send us careening one way or the other. We have immense power now, but perhaps not the wisdom to match it.
That's the critical point, isn't it? As we gain this almost godlike power to shape biology, to shape destiny itself, what responsibilities come with that? How do we make sure this incredible drive for knowledge and power doesn't just benefit a few or lead us somewhere we don't want to go? How do we align it with well-being, with meaning for everyone as we approach this potential new singularity? What stands out most to you as you think about this journey?